Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and I am creating a series that I wish to introduce with three sample stories that should already be released. And to be fair, a version of the first one has been released. But my original plan was to finish the three sample stories, which are short stories that are more to give you the atmosphere and feel for my series without giving too much away before I begin the series properly later on. And I had it in my mind that I would release the first sample story on Palm Sunday for the West. The second sample story I would release on Easter Sunday, which was also Palm Sunday for the East. And the third sample story I would release on Holy Pascha, the Eastern version of Easter for Orthodox Christianity. And then, after I had released my three sample stories, give a few more promotional videos, and then in July release the full series. That, of course, did not happen. I did release a version of the first sample story, but I wasn't able to complete it in time. Things came up. So now I shall release the three sample stories throughout July to commemorate both America turning 250 and my own birthday, which happens to be on the 4th of July. By so doing, I hope that this series can be born on the same day that I am, and perhaps share in the America's 250th anniversary, but I'm not really the most patriotic person around. I actually don't view America's founding fathers as great heroes who freed us from tyranny and gave us the greatest form of government of all time and produced the greatest document written by human hands, the Constitution of the United States of America. I understand, rather, that they were not entirely honest, that the tyranny they faced was not actually tyranny. King George III was not really a tyrant, and the 8-year-long war that cost many lives wasn't really one that was justified. Especially when you look at the British point of view, which most people don't. Minor taxation issues, even if you think they're unfair, were not worth killing people over, especially since they were low taxes and not exuberantly high, and there's no reason to believe they would climb higher. The taxes were being used, after all, not to enrich the king personally, but to defend the colonies and to pay off a war debt that the colonies had incurred. And one of the tyrannies of King George III was not letting people steal Indian land. But therein lies the point of my series. Unsurprisingly, if you know the concept. You see, our world is one that is not well educated. And when it does get people willing to educate it, they're often going to be ideologically slanted in some way or another. Which should be rectified. And my series happens to be a series featuring a time agency. That means that I am free to explore historical settings and hopefully present them in a more accurate light. I'm going to examine claims of history and the ideologies that drove them, and show, as best as we can, what actually happened. Although that does come with a caveat that I don't know myself exactly what happened. No one does. We rely on historical research, and I could get details wrong. For that matter, I could even get details wrong that are documented, because I am not infallible and I am currently working on this project alone. But nevertheless, I will strive for accuracy. meaning I am not going to delve into the mythologies used by the left to either demonize America's founding fathers as slaveholders or lionize them as some sort of proto-socialists that were fighting the wealthy, or the atheist mythology that says they were all deists who rejected Christianity. But I'm also not going to go with a right-wing version of them being effectively evangelical Christians and nobly and good men who stood for whatever the modern conservatives do. However, what makes my Time Agency series different than one might expect is the focus. You see, this series is not primarily going to be about teaching history, although teaching history will certainly be part of the project. After all, it would be a waste of a good time travel series if you did not use time travel to go to historical settings and explain the events that were happening and what drove them. Obviously, that will be a part of this series. But the main focus of the series will actually be something that is largely ignored when you deal with time travel. And that is how to actually time travel. You see, most time travel stories are not actually about time travel, so much as they are about character studies and sometimes exploring historical events or making a point about them. But ultimately, time travel is often used just to get our intrepid time travelers to a different time period than they are from, so that they could have some sort of adventure. We very rarely deal in time travel stories with how time travel actually works. And that is exactly what I am going to present here. One of the deepest aspects of this series. Hopefully it won't get demonetized. Hopefully this video will have enough human flubbing in it that people will know that an actual person made it. If that translates to the later series, I don't know, but most time travel stories do not focus on the science of how time travel works, and mine will. I will honestly explore actual quantum mechanics and quantum physics, hoping to keep it as accurate as I can, with the caveat that we may discover things that undermine something I write now, or perhaps because I have books on quantum mechanics, my materials are already outdated and being superseded. Or worse, I might be confronted with a possibility that there are two conflicting views and I have to pick one, and I may pick the wrong one. Nevertheless, I will strive to be accurate to quantum mechanics as we understand it today. And a lot of the series will delve into the nature of time and how it works. Which brings up another aspect that makes my time travel story a bit different. For you see, another thing that I'm going to do that's not the same as most science fiction today is that I am not going to ground my series in materialism and in secular humanism. These are not going to be the explicit truth of my world that I am presenting, nor are they going to be implicit. They're not explicit and they're not implicit. I'm not writing from a humanist point of view. Rather, I am going to write from a more traditional Christian point of view. And by saying that, I don't mean that I'm going to write a world where the agency runs with science and you have a lot of scientists who believe in science instead of religion, and a few people believe in religion instead and they debate it, and maybe something happens that can't be explained. The religious person, of course, takes it as confirmation of their beliefs, but there's enough leeway for the scientist to doubt. I'm not doing that trope. That's just not the way this series works. I'm not going to operate under the assumption that science and religion are two opposing camps that cannot coexist. I'm not going to operate on Stephen Jay Gould's alternative to that of non-overlapping magisteria. Rather, I'm going to operate in the view where science and religion are both describing the same realities, and sometimes the words are different, which brings me to the exact nature of what it is that I am presenting. Because I am not writing a book for right-wing Christian bookstores or evangelical Christians. I mean no offense to them, but that is just not this series. This series will assume a Christian anthropology and a Christian ontology and a Christian metaphysics. But the Christian metaphysics, ontology, and anthropology do not come from modern evangelical Protestantism. They don't come from Protestantism at all. Rather, the series will be deeply rooted in scholasticism. This would be the medieval way of thinking about theology that was used by medieval Catholics and, to some extent, Eastern Orthodox. I will be appealing to Plato and Aristotle as well, and to Socrates. Because when I say traditional Christian, I mean traditional Christian, which means I do not assume the Christian religion is the one true religion and all others are simply false. I don't assume they're all equally true, but I will understand that there is some truth, to varying degrees, in all of the world's major religious traditions, including the ones we no longer call religions, like secular humanism. Because medieval Christians had no concept of the idea that theirs is a completely enclosed system called a religion, that if it is true, the others are simply false, but rather regarded other people's beliefs as an admixture of error and truth, which is how I am going to approach this, meaning that I'm free to draw concepts from Taoism or Buddhism or even Hinduism. I'm allowed to read Muslim philosophers, and I think they make a good point. They can have their ideas in my series. But the series will nevertheless remain grounded in scholasticism. And scholasticism itself is rooted in Aristotelian logic, which itself maps more closely and more accurately onto quantum mechanics than does classical materialism, which we already know is false but pretend is true anyway in the modern world. Well, I'm going to dispense with that. Therefore, this series will be deeply embedded in Christian metaphysics from the scholastic tradition and in actual quantum mechanics, which will work complementary to each other because they are describing the same reality rather than as opposing forces, or even as forces in need of reconciliation, or even as forces that cooperate, because I don't see them as two separate forces, but as one, a unified reality. Which is another thing that I dispense with in this series, viewing our existence as divided between two worlds. The classical materialist world that works on classical physics, and the quantum world, which doesn't work on classical physics and operates on quantum weirdness, quantum strangeness. I don't really see these as two separate worlds. I see our world as emergent from the quantum world and materialism as simply false. I believe that this is actually borne out by these scientific observations. But we prefer to cling to materialism because most of our modern philosophical and cultural theories are rooted in materialism. You can't have secular humanism, for instance, if materialism is false, at least not in its present state. But therein lies the point. This series is going to be unique in that way. It is going to be something that is deeply rooted in explaining ontology, explaining the nature of time, how time works, how reality emerges, how our world is not really the solid world of matter that we think it is, but is instead a collection of quantum fields, and how consciousness is not something that emerges from matter, that we don't start in a material world with no consciousness, with just matter in motion that eventually formed combinations that gave rise to life, that eventually consciousness emerged from. I do not accept the idea that consciousness comes from matter, and that matter It's the ultimate bedrock foundation of conscious being, and that consciousness is an emergent property of matter. Rather, consciousness is actually something foundational and embedded in the nature of existence, and matter comes from thought more than thought from matter, thus taking on a more idealist approach. And by idealist, I don't mean it in the modern sense of I'm looking at the bright side, my cup is half full and not half empty sort of idealist. I'm not talking about an idealist who has some sort of political philosophy that they want to impose. I'm saying that ideas precede form, the physical forms that we see. Although in classical speech, the idea is the form and substance would be what it assumes, which is another thing that I will try and teach, the actual terminologies. Because I honestly think our modern world is in desperate need, both of better entertainment, because the entertainment industry has collapsed, something produced by an actual person and not AI slop, although I may use AI to create images, because I'm not an artist, and to do research and to clean up the text. But I will be writing the stories. And I will be presenting the stories with various characters. One character I don't have a name for. I call him Sky Last Name. This is a name I use for a lot of my characters, by the way, when I'm writing stories. I eventually replace Sky Last Name with a different name. And by the way, I don't know why people keep making this assumption. When I say my character is called Sky Last Name, and that's a placeholder, I don't mean I have a character named Sky, but I don't know what his last name is, so I just put last name in, and I will replace his last name with something like Jones or Smith, so we'll have Sky Smith or Sky Jones. The entire name, Sky Last Name, is a name that I use for characters in a lot of my works before I name the character, meaning both his first and last name will be replaced. I have to explain that because everyone I've told this to seems to think I have a character named Sky and I'm just looking for a last name for him, and I don't know why. I have a second character, Aelith Sherford, called Anne Jill. And I have a third character whose name I shall withhold until the series is given. But I do have it planned out. And I am hoping that people find my series and enjoy it. I'm also hoping that the tube of you stops thinking everyone is AI and actually allows monetization on channels and stops demonetizing other channels. Incidentally, my channel is not monetized yet. That's because I haven't been around long enough to be monetized and don't have enough viewers yet anyway. But that doesn't matter. Not really. You see, I don't think at present YouTube will monetize my channel, especially if I give too polished a presentation, because it will think it's AI even if it's not. And if I, dare I say it, use AI art to illustrate my work, well, I'm definitely an AI slop channel then. That's actually why I'm presenting this introduction in the way that I'm doing it. This wasn't scripted. And what's more, I'm intentionally doing it in a very slapdash fashion. Hopefully, the computer can tell I'm an actual person. I don't show my face. That may be a problem. But even if I showed my face, how would they know that it's my actual face and not an AI creation? I don't understand the system, YouTube. I really don't. But this is nevertheless one of 3 introductions that I'm doing right now for my series. And I hope you stay around to enjoy it.